My wife and I like to watch a program on Netflix called The Crown. I don't know if any of y'all have seen that. But The Crown, it's kind of a running history of the British monarchy since Elizabeth took the crown. It started in like the 30s or 40s, and they had a couple of seasons with younger actors. Now they're up to the 60s. It's not an everyday chronicle of their lives, but it's more of it takes episodes, important episodes, events from their lives. And I was watching one last night. I guess the whole season's on there, but there was an event, I wouldn't have remembered it, some of you might, in 1966 in Aberfan, Wales, which was a mining town, where they had a mine disaster. And I'm going to get online and check it out. I don't really understand the whole process, but I think this was what they called coal dross or something that they piled up next to the mine. It's like part of the mountain. And they had gotten an unusual amount of rain. And the village sat right next to this mountain. And they had a landslide that took out the end of the town, including the school. And 144 people died, including 116 children. It was a terrible event. Of course, the program was about some of the political fallout with the Prime Minister and the Queen and so forth. But various members of the obviously would go and visit the scene, but I think it was the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, that attended the funeral of like 80 children. They just had them lined up in little boxes. But he was profoundly affected by the scene because as he stood there at that funeral, all of the parents and the townspeople that were there at the funeral were singing a hymn there as they buried their children. It was a terrible scene. But it got me to thinking about this study on sin, on suffering, and how that there are certainly in our lives extremely traumatic events. But again, it is only the Bible and Christianity that makes sense of these things. People who are atheistic or skeptic would look at that event and they can only see purposelessness. And frankly, I don't understand or I don't know how they deal with it on some occasions.
They're struggling to hear upstairs. They have a few treasure. Yeah.
All right, we'll try that. Is that better? See, I had it too close last week. Plus, my voice is not so good because I've got some congestion. So it is a topic which affects people on a daily basis, and we've been looking at some of these sub-causes, and we were finishing up with Satan's role, I believe, last week, and we noticed that, of course, while the age of the miraculous is over, it is clear from the Bible that God still works providentially in this world, and it appears from the New Testament that Satan is still at work too, and he's after us. And we talked about some of this terminology that it uses, things like snares and wiles and fiery darts in various passages, Ephesians, 2 Corinthians, and other places. In fact, I was reading from 2 Corinthians this morning, that word for devices, we are not ignorant of his devices. I think the New American Standard translates that schemes. He's a schemer, plots, tricks, uses ploys to ensnare us. And so we have to be careful that we don't engage when adversity enters our lives, that we don't engage in knee-jerk reactions and react destructively, because let's face it, if we're not able to look through these things through spiritual lenses and we're looking at them through fleshly ones, then it's going to be very difficult to deal with the psychological and emotional fallout that comes with bad things that happen even to good people. And so we mentioned last week too that I think it was ironic that, on one occasion Peter blurted out something about Christ and his mission. And he said, "Get behind me, Satan." And yet it was Peter who wrote later about this roaring lion that goes about seeking whom he may devour. And so it's interesting that the Holy Spirit used him to write those words. I guess we're somewhat familiar with the sifting process. If you read the Old Testament especially, you talk about separating the wheat from the chaff and so forth. And of course we have modern methods for doing that. And even in the New Testament it talks about that separation and putting the chaff in the fire, right? But look in Luke 22:31, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may what? Sift you as wheat." And it seems to indicate, you remember that Satan, and we'll talk about this in a moment, how that Satan appeared before God to ask for Job. Sounds kind of like he did the same thing with Peter. Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. Satan wanted to be allowed to test Peter. And the problem, and unfortunately in this case, Peter didn't do so well in the test.
Greg, I think that word "sift you" is plural. Means
All of them. And if you think about it, none of them did very well. Because let's think about it. Remember what happened at the cross? It said they all what? Fled. It was one young man, it said, probably John Mark, it said that he was in such a hurry, somebody grabbed his outer garment. He just left it, took off, half clothed. So, here's the thing, and we'll finish up with this particular section of Satan's role. When we as Christians are traumatized by some catastrophic event in life, and then we throw in the towel, and we quit on God, and we quit on the church, then basically what we're doing is telling Satan what? You win. Okay, you win. I mean, do we really want to give him that satisfaction? Is the question. Do you ever like it when somebody whips you at something? You enjoy that? Whether it's sports or even a board game, do you like it when you get whipped? Nobody likes that. Nobody likes a whipping. But that's what we say when we say, "Oh, well, I'll just quit, give up." We're saying, "Okay, Satan, you whipped me. I'll stick my tail between my legs and quit." And nobody likes a quitter, do we? This next one, E, most of these that we've talked about, I think most Christians have grasped at some point if you do any cursory reading of the Scriptures. E, God's vindication, I find to be a little deeper, a little more profound, frankly. Awe-inspiring. But another fundamental explanation that the Bible gives for our suffering in this life is God's vindication, and that is seen in the book of Job. Satan appears before God. He's allowed to. "What have you been doing?" "Well, I've been walking around through the earth," with the implication that, hey, it belongs to me. "Have you considered my servant Job? Have you seen his faithfulness? Have you seen his righteousness?" And Satan says, "Well, look, Job is serving you for what reason? For what he can get out of it. What's in it for him?" The implication is, and this is the part we need to get, because while this book is tangentially a little bit about Job, this book is really about God. Satan is saying, "God, you are not worthy on your own to be worshipped apart from the benefits that you bestow upon people, the bribes that you hand out. You on your own are not worthy of adoration, praise, and worship. And And what the book of Job tells us is whether we ever get a thing from God, period, because frankly we deserve nothing from Him. He is always worthy to be praised and honored and worshipped. And that's the point of the whole story. And so Satan says, no, you're not. And so if you strip Job of all these things, he'll turn his back on you. And here's the thing. That's not to deny that some people are religious because of some perceived benefit. And frankly, there's nothing wrong with asking at times, what's in it for me? What is in it for me? And you? Yeah, sure. Eternal life. But I know there are people that attend religious services of various kinds because of the business contacts they make. I know that's true. Some people see it as it's a social thing. It's like a club. And that's where their friendships are. And it's more about that to them. I'm a young man, or I was once, excuse me. I was a young man once. So I understand it when 22-year-old men, guys, visit various congregations doing what? Scoping out the women. These Christian young men, they go to various congregations because where they're at, I've run through all them, I'll go somewhere else. You know how it is. They're looking for something. Looking for a Christian girl. So yeah, there are other motivations. But it doesn't follow that everyone is religious out of purely selfish motives. And certainly, Job maintained his integrity under terrible circumstances. So the point is, God is worthy of our worship and devotion whether or not we ever receive a particular benefit from Him. It is about His vindication. And so when we have bad things happen to us, the natural inclination is to pine and to whine and say, what? What do we ask? What's the question? Why me? What the book of Job teaches us is the question ought to be, why not me? Exactly. Why not me? Because when we consider ourselves in light of the infinitude and magnitude of God, we have to step back and say, do I deserve anything less when I reflect on His grandeur? I am told, I don't know, that in past generations, older generations, someone would get punished by their parents or a teacher at school, and they might say something like this: I got less than what I deserved, right? You ever heard that phrase? I got less than I deserved. That is true humility, a mature appraisal of reality. And so the Bible teaches us that God is worthy of worship even when we receive nothing from Him. He's entitled to it no matter what. And that's what the book of Job teaches us. And that in some sense then runs us into the next point, and it all kind of runs together. It's not only a vindication of God, but suffering can be a verification of faithfulness, a test of our genuineness. And that's also seen in the book of Job. Look at Job chapter 23. Starting in about verse 2. Even today my complaint is bitter, my hand is listless because of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find Him, that I might come to His seat. I would present my case before Him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which He would answer me, and understand what He would say to me.
Would he contend with me in his great power? No, but he would take note of me. There the upright could reason with him, and I would be delivered forever from my judge. Let's stop for a minute. What is one of the things that's eating at Job as he cries out to God? What is he getting back from God at this point? Silence. And Job says, look, I know. And understand, Job's never said in this book that he was perfect, sinlessly perfect. But he knows that he's lived a pretty faithful life. He hasn't turned his back on God. And as we like to say in the New Testament, the book of John, we talk about a difference between isolated acts of sin and a sinful lifestyle, as the tense of the verbs is used. Well, Job was not living a sinful lifestyle. Job was not perfect, but he knew he was faithful. And he said, you know what? If I could just have... Now, he was a little naive. He said, look, I could present a good case before God. But the point is, he knew that God would listen to him. God wouldn't just ignore him and destroy him. That God was aware of his spiritual condition. Job says, I know God knows how I've been living. He knows. Look, I go forward, verse 8, but he is not there, and backward, but I cannot perceive him. When he works on the left hand, I cannot behold him. When he turns to the right hand, I cannot see him. But now, look at the crescendo here, verse 10, an unbelievable verse. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commandment of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than necessary food. Job says, I know he knows the way that I take. He's not talking to me right now, but he knows. He knows that I'm faithful. And so he talks about being tested and coming forth as gold. We talked earlier about that furnace of affliction. That's not what he's talking about here. Here he's alluding to the touchstone, a process that they used to test the quality of raw ore in those days. We use sophisticated chemical techniques now. But a touchstone was a finely grained small tablet of dark stone used for assaying precious metal alloys. And so you took a soft metal like gold or silver, you rubbed it against it, and you looked at the streak that it left, and different alloys of gold had different colors, so you could compare them to others and say, how pure is this metal? And Job says, my suffering and hardship is a manifestation of God rubbing me against the touchstone and afflicting me with tribulation, and I am confident that when the test is over and he quit testing my spiritual status, that he's going to say, man, God's going to say, this is pure gold. And so what's the point? The point is sometimes our suffering can be used to point to the faithfulness and the genuineness of the Christian faith and of the suffering. So really in the book of Job we see two things going on. Number one, we see the vindication of God. And number two, we see God calling attention to the righteousness of Job through his suffering and faithfulness. Paul said the same thing. Let's go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. We looked at this earlier, but just a short part of it. Let's read a little more. We were talking about Satan. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Let's read a little more. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations. Well, why? What was the danger? Why would Paul be exalted? Why could he get prideful? Why? Paul said on one occasion, I knew of a man one time that did what? Got caught up to the third heaven. Who was the man? It was Paul. Paul was given some things that we could never fathom or comprehend without experience. And it certainly would have been, I guess, a temptation to be a little prideful. But he says, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. Now notice, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches and needs and persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. God tells Paul, excuse me, I don't have to take this away from you, because Paul, you already know something. What did Paul know? Same thing that Job did. In our modern lingo, Paul and Job could say, God likes me. He's approved of me. God has accepted me. I am his friend, I am his servant, and I know that, and therefore I can deal with these things. I have his approval. Whatever comes my way, as long as I know that God loves me and accepts me and considers me a faithful child, then I can say the same thing that Job said in Job chapter 13, verse 15. What? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Well, turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. Same thing. We're talking about verification of faithfulness, proving the genuineness of our love for God, Christ. Look at 1 Peter chapter 1, beginning about verse 3. We get the same idea. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of God through faith for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. Now notice verse 7, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen you love. Though now you do not see him, yet believing you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. We've been the recipient, he says, of God's mercy, a living hope, an incorruptible inheritance, and that spiritual assurance surpasses anything physical that we might have to endure in this life. And this pain and suffering that we endure may demonstrate the genuineness of our faith. And then it comes out, he says, more precious than gold. It's interesting, of course, gold is physical and eventually will perish. But our faith will carry us into eternity. So, you have to ask your question. Well, how do I know that what I'm experiencing is not an opportunity that God's using to show the genuineness of my faith? It's a time of verification of my faithfulness. And of course, I mean, you know, the tough part is, I guess, we can look at all these things and all these reasons and sub-causes for suffering, and you're not going to really know which one it is. But here's the thing. Even, let's say for a moment that it's Satan. Well, it can still be used for a verification of my faithfulness in the that he is worthy to be served even when things don't go our way. And of course, with the Christian worldview, we understand that it's only temporary and for the moment. I mean, you know, the thing about it is, let's think about the skeptic and the atheist. Why do these environmentalists and animal rights people, why do they run around all the time trying to convince everybody to save the planet? Why? It's a simple answer.
All they have.
It's all they have. It's all they have. See? That's not so for the Christian. And to them, any suffering really is purposeless. That's why they do everything they can to avoid it. Whether it's not to think about it, whether it's to medicate it, or whatever. Suffering is purposeless to them, therefore we avoid it at all costs. We avoid thinking about it, we avoid talking about it. That's why they're always more willing to go to, as the wise man Solomon said, to the house of mirth rather than what? The one of mourning. Because they don't want to think about life beyond this life. Because they don't believe it.
Ray,
Yep.
view of God's chastising hand mentioned in Hebrews.
Which we talked about under self-improvement and the great parent.
How can we tell the difference, what's happening is God's chastising hand or God's fruitful work?
I think it's a good question. Brother Tom has asked, or has posed the question. So I'll throw it to the class. I think it's a pretty simple answer. How do I know that when we were talking about the great parent under self-improvement, how do I know that if I'm suffering, on the one hand, it could be God's chastisement. Maybe he's trying to nudge me away from something, or get me to quit doing something, or whatever you want to do. How do I know the difference whether it's God's chastisement or it's a verification of my faithfulness? That is, oh, well, God really does approve of me. He's just using this to display to the world around me the proper reaction on the part of a Christian. How do I know the difference between the two? What should I do in that case? What would be the prudent thing to do as I'm going through it?
Self-examination.
Yeah, I think so. Self-examination. When I say self-examination, what do I use to examine myself? Yeah, I have to go to the Word of God and determine now, is there something in my life that needs correction? And if so, correct it. But after I've done that thorough self-examination and I don't find any glaring matter, I mean, we all have. We all sin from time to time. We all make mistakes. But if I've truly been walking in the light, living a life faithful to Him, then, and again, go back to the story of Job. At the end of the book, God spends, about 3 chapters or so at the end of that book talking to Job, questioning Job, trying to get Job to perceive some things. But nowhere in that discussion does God do what for Job? And nowhere, at least we see in that book, does God do what for Job? He never explains why things happen to him, ever. He never said, oh, by the way, just so you'll know, it wasn't anything, Satan was just, before me one day and proposed this test. Never says that. So as far as we know, Job never got, at least on this side of eternity, Job did not get an explanation of why he went through what he did. God didn't see fit that he needed. And He doesn't give one to us either. So we're not any better than Job. Let me read you a little quote. For those of you that are older, you probably always enjoyed Paul Harvey. A little arrested story, those kinds of things. Here's a quote from Paul Harvey, 1962. We are the sentence of death. Most rational persons learn to live with that certain uncertainty, enjoy a reasonably full life in spite of it. The mother never lived who did not wish she could, as Christ said he would, fold her children under her wing and protect them from harm. Even he couldn't. For it is appointed to each of us, quote, once to die. First, our children must be brought face to face with the irrefutable finality of that judgment. Once they understand that paradise is elsewhere, that we have to prove here that we deserve to be there, then your youngster will understand why it isn't going to be easy. It isn't supposed to be. This is the shakedown cruise. This earthly while separates the men from the boys. Don't fear to confront your child with that fact. Youngsters want a challenge more than they want peace and security. They will go out of their way to manufacture danger. The present war scare will subside. Obviously referring to Vietnam. But there will be other uncertainties to take its place. These are best faced by persons who, however scared, struggle forward through the dark toward the light. Now, for the atheist and skeptic, there is no light to which one is pressing toward. That's the problem. Their paradise is just a dismal physical place, this earth. But for the Christian, the realities of life make perfect sense. And so we are better positioned to put suffering in its proper perspective and assimilate the blows that come our way. Yes?
Greg, 2 Corinthians 13:5 is exactly to this point, I think. It says, examine yourself as to whether or not you are in the faith. Test yourself. Know you not yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified. But I trust that you will know that we are not disqualified.
So I examine myself as to whether I'm in the faith. And then if I'm in the faith, I move on from there. The bottom line is, for the Christian, we're never going to really, it's like providence. Paul defined providence in Philemon with one word. It is the doctrine of what? But he didn't use the word chance. What word did he use? Providence is the doctrine of what? Perhaps. He said, perhaps for a time, this happened that you might receive him back. Perhaps. Even an apostle of Christ said, I don't know. And so sometimes I hear people say, I understand. They say, well, this was God's providence. Well, I don't know. I've never been that definitive about the situation. Sometimes we look at a situation, man, that sure got to be providential, but still, I'm not God. I don't know. All I can say is perhaps. I don't think I would say more than the Apostle Paul would say about it.
The amazing thing is you can look back over your life and you can see the traces of God's providence.
Yeah, and you can see traces, but again, you still say, you have to say, well, yeah, perhaps it was. Then you get on the other side, and I'm sure we can ask whatever questions we want to. Well, I shouldn't say that. We can ask them. I don't know if we have answers or not. So let's wrap it up and let's recap. There are legitimate reasons to make sense of suffering in the world. The atheist says that suffering proves there is no God. Number one, why do people suffer? The overarching reason is that this world, with all its positive and negative elements, was designed to serve the singular purpose of providing humans with the ideal environment in which to decide where to spend eternity. That is the number one overall arcing reason. That we are in a veil of soulmate. We have been put in an environment as free moral agents to make decisions to determine where we will spend really the most important parts of our lives, and that is the eternal part. But there are other sub-causes because of the environment in which we live. Number Number 2, all people sin and harm themselves and others. We suffer because of our own sin and the sin of other people. We talked about that. We talked about self-improvement. We can be improved, matured, strengthened, perfected, and made fit for time and eternity. We talked about Satan seeking us to take as many people to hell with him as possible. Today we talked about how that God is vindicated by those who choose to love and obey him apart from any benefits that he might bestow upon them. He is always worthy of our praise, honor, and glory, whether we ever receive one thing from him. The last one is, those who are faithful are verified in their spiritual genuineness through suffering. And the world is able to see the genuineness of Christianity, the faith, through the things that happen to us and how we respond to it.
How we react to it.
And so, we've spent a lot of time on this subject, and I did so for 2 reasons. One, it is the one and frankly only argument that the atheist has. Everything else we're talking about in here, really, the science and all of this stuff that we're going to talk about is not on their side. Now, they choose to ignore reality. This is the one argument that they believe to be their best. But we've seen it's not a good reason. The other reason I've spent so much time on it is so that I think as Christians we need to understand, because so many times we tend to make the wrong assumptions when things are going our way. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I must not be living right because, we have a bad day. It's the world in which we live. Sometimes things don't go right. But it's not a question of, are things going to always go right? The ultimate question is what? How do I respond to things that don't go right? How do I respond to the tests and the trials that come up? That's the real question. Any more comments on that? You've suffered enough through this discussion.
Greg, thank you for the way that you brought up China chastisement. In a way, couldn't God be chasing through the natural law of sowing and reaping if we're sowing to the wind?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, we've looked at all these. I mean, if you go back to C, and you talk about self-improvement, I mean, it's the environment in which we live. God is perfect. He is all wise. Everything he's put here and the way life operates is for that purpose of either making us better if we will choose to let it and drawing closer to him, or we can, look, you can take 2 people and they can undergo the exact same things. And this person gets closer to God, becomes more faithful, grows through those things. This person gives up on God, blames God, abandons God over the same thing. It's the environment that he's created for free moral agents to make those determinations on their own. Now, as we said before, 2 things keep in mind to close us out. He has given us everything we need to encourage us to make the right decision. Okay? He's given it to us. But number 2, keep in mind what Paul said in the Corinthian letter, nothing is going to ever happen to you that's not common to man. Don't ever think, and I understand, some of you in this room could come up to me and say to me, you don't understand the situation I'm dealing with. And that could be true. You're going through some things that I haven't been through yet. And maybe I won't. I don't know. But there is somebody, either in this room or other people in this world, that have gone through the same thing you're going through. You're not special. I'm not special. And so we have to keep that in mind, because when we start thinking, he said, you need to take heed lest you fall. What do you mean by that? When you start thinking that I'm the only one, Elijah said, what? I'm the only one. I'm the only one. God said, Elijah, there's 7,000 in Israel that have not bowed the knee to Baal. So here's what you need to do. Get up and do something. Go to work and quit feeling sorry for yourself. I want you to go anoint Elisha to take your place. I want you to go anoint Hazael or whoever it was as king over Syria. You got stuff to do. Get up and get out of this cave. And quit feeling sorry for yourself, because you're not the only one.
You have people that have, everybody has their own type of suffering. People that have a particular type of suffering are well equipped to help someone else.
Absolutely. There's always somebody out there that does understand and can probably help you through whatever that particular problem is. There is somebody. And if there's nobody around close by physically, there is one person in heaven that knows what you're dealing with. And he says, I will be the one that's judging everybody on the last day, because I came there and I lived just like you did, and frankly went through more than what any of you are going to go through. Do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, a little histrionics here, editorializing. Back when Katrina, I think it was Hurricane Katrina, there was an infamous so-called TV evangelist said God was punishing them for their sin. There were other people after 9/11 said Nostradamus predicted that would happen. A lot of folks absolutely live their lives. They won't even get started. Matter of fact, there was a president that a whole lot of folks love to love, believe in the astrological. So people have all kinds of different things that guides their lives. But Jesus told us to be careful how we hear. End of subject.
Well, now that you mentioned Katrina, I'll finish with this editorial. I mentioned earlier about this idea of, I got blessed with what I deserve. I'm sick of hearing the word deserve.
I can't hear you, brother.
I'm sick of hearing the word deserve in our society.
The word what?
Deserve. I deserve
Okay.
X.
Okay.
No. None of us deserve anything. I'm sick of lawyers' commercials. And I know some of these guys, but I'm sick of lawyers' commercials that say, if you'll hire me, I'll get you what you deserve. No, that's not what the law is designed to do. The law is designed to compensate you for losses caused by a negligent individual. It's not designed to give you what you deserve. And frankly, that's what the way most of the people in this country think now, is you give them something for nothing, and the next thing you know, after you give them something for nothing for long enough, they deserve it. I deserve it. So, there's my editorial. We'll pick up with creation versus evolution next week. So that's Roman numeral 6, page 3 of your outline. Creation versus